Welcome to Common Sense Wellness with Dr. Gary Martin, the show that helps you take control of your health with clarity, confidence, and practical wisdom. Dr. Gary Martin has spent decades in clinical practice and natural wellness research, discovering that the key to lifelong vitality lies in understanding the body's signals before they become symptoms. Each week, we will explore simple science-backed methods like mineral testing, facial scans, and lifestyle adjustments that help you restore balance from the inside out. You'll also hear from expert guests and real clients who have turned their health challenges into stories of transformation. No gimmicks, no fads, just common sense wellness that works. Now, here's your host, Dr. Gary Martin.
Welcome to Common Sense Wellness. Today, I am excited to announce that I've got a practitioner and a client, Sarica Cernohous, and she lives in Camp Verde, right?
Yes.
Camp Verde,
Yep.
Arizona, which is a place that I do have some extended. Well, I guess they're not really family, but we grew up with them. They're like cousins that aren't cousins. You know, everybody probably has some family like that. Anyway, they've lived in Camp Verde forever and love it. They moved here from Phoenix. And I've said for I don't know how many years, I got to go to Camp Verde. You know,
now you have two reasons.
I've been through there kind of on the way to Flagstaff and, you know, the Lake Powell and, you know, that whole Interstate 17 trip you have to make and all that. So, well, anyway,
it's different once you get off the highway.
Yeah. Welcome, Sarica.
Thank you so much.
So give us a little background on yourself.
Yeah, I'm a licensed acupuncturist. I got my license in 2001. Wow, it's been a long time. And so doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. I also work a lot in the arena of nutrition, whole food nutrition. I've been a Weston A. Price chapter leader for well over a decade. I'm a member of the National Association of Nutrition Professionals. I also work in epigenetics using hair follicles as a scan assessment. And then I also work with bioenergetic assessment and support using the L.A.C. for all system. So a lot of different ways that I like to support patients and clients.
All right. So you have a deep background in Japanese style acupuncture and TCM. Was there a specific aha moment in your practice where you realized that needles and herbs, etc., were not enough and you had to start looking into your patients' kitchens?
Yeah, kind of from the beginning, actually. I was into nutrition before I was an acupuncturist. And I actually used to be the head cashier at a natural food store in Flagstaff many years ago. And of course, before that, having my own interest in nutrition. So I feel like the nutrition preceded the robust education and experience I've had with acupuncture and Chinese medicine. So, and I've always felt, in fact, I wrote a book on traditional food preparation techniques called The Funky Kitchen. And when I did the reissue of that book, you know, I was basically talking about, you know, is this one of the missing pieces in your health and wellness is food preparation, meaning traditional food preparation techniques. Because I see a lot of people talking about nutrition, but I think sometimes we need to go a little bit deeper than just macronutrient information. So yes, I would say all along, I have been what I call myself a food nerd. And so that's just, and the thing that was great about Chinese medicine is the foundation of it, the training, the education that I received was that you look at foods and herbs and even medications from an energetic perspective, their temperature, their action, the channels that they enter. So that's also how I think about food relative to seasons and food preparation, then of course the person's constitution. So yeah, there are a lot of ways that I think about nutrition.
All right. So you've mentioned that we shouldn't just eat like our ancestors, but we should prepare food like them.
Yeah.
So what was the first traditional food habit that you adopted that personally changed your health?
Yeah. The very first was actually reading the book, The Maker's Diet, written by Jordan Rubin. And that took me from this practice of eating foods that came from the natural food store, but in the more processed aisles, and got me into looking at the basic components of food. You know, if I'm going to get beans, I'm going to go get dried beans. If I'm going to get rice, I'm going to go get dried rice. And so really looking at those beginning pieces. And again, in Chinese medicine, food is considered that way. So that, though, for me, for whatever reason, it was new information somehow. And then the very first traditionally prepared food that I made on my own was making yogurt. And that was a trip because it was my going to the store, getting milk, using yogurt cultures, and then putting milk into a warming vat, which is something you just don't do in the West. You don't take cold milk and go make it warm and leave it there for 8 hours. Well, that's what you have to do when you're doing a thermophilic yogurt preparation. And then, you know, at the end of the day, you have yourself some yogurt, which was amazing to me, but it was a leap of faith.
So most of our listeners try to buy organic and healthy foods. Why do you say that even a high quality organic bean or grain can actually be hard on the body if it hasn't been pre-digested?
I love that you took that word, pre-digested, because that's really what it is. The reason is because we actually have a rather rudimentary digestive tract. And somehow, some way, our ancestors knew that if you don't do certain things to these types of edibles, that they're going to have things in them that are going to make your stomach upset. They make it so that you don't feel as well. And so they knew that there were different techniques that needed to happen. And that's really what these traditional food preparation methods are. You're soaking, you can ferment, you can sprout. These are activities that make those foods more digestible, and they take away different components that make those foods more bioavailable to our bodies.
I think you might have answered this next question. You might have, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just in case there was something that it'll spark that you left out. It was going to be for the person who's intimidated by the word fermentation. Can you explain the simple common sense science behind what soaking and sprouting actually does to a seed or a grain? I think you already partially explained that.
Yeah, what it does is it causes an activation on that very dry, hard food. I mean, if you think about, you know, a dried bean or a grain of rice, these things are very dry. So we're beginning to rehydrate them. But in the soaking process, what we're doing is we are actually activating different enzymatic activity that is going to work on better relieving the food of those anti-nutrients, those things that make it difficult for us to digest. So we're activating enzymatic activity. And if we do bring in a starter culture, possibly, let's say, a yogurt culture or a little bit of milk kefir, something along those lines, what we're then doing is we're bringing in bacteria and beneficial yeast that help to actually cause more of an activity upon those nutrients, those anti-nutrients, I should say, that again help to degrade them and make the food more bioavailable to us. So one of the kind of stories around sauerkraut. So when people think of fermented foods, they may think of sauerkraut. And one of the stories about sauerkraut is in shipping voyages. You can imagine on old shipping voyages, these would be long, long periods of time where no fresh food would be available, which is just a crazy thought. Like, we don't even think this way anymore. But the preservation technique of pickling or fermenting, naturally fermenting, which would have been the only way to do this in days past, by taking, let's say, cabbage. Cabbage, if you just take it out on the open sea, it's going to have just a period of time that it's going to be okay for you to eat. And then it's going to come to spoilage, especially again, you can imagine the conditions on these ships. They certainly didn't have deep freezes and refrigerators, these sorts of things. So the fermentation process of making a sauerkraut out of that cabbage allowed for a preservation, and it actually increases the bioavailable vitamin C that is in the cabbage naturally. So there is an alchemy that occurs, a transformation that occurs through different techniques related to what our ancestors did around different foods. And then they would do that, of course, even with dairy. I mean, you take dairy foods and that allows for a longer shelf stable period. Again, refrigeration is something that's very new on the scene. And when people would need food through, a series of months, maybe when production would have fallen off, these types of techniques not only help to preserve the food, but the other great thing is they made it more bioavailable to the body.
All right. So in TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, how do we see the relationship between the health of the spleen, stomach, some people refer to it as the digestive fire,
Right.
and the chronic fatigue or brain fog that so many people feel today?
Yeah. Yeah. In Chinese medicine, the earth element, which is what we're talking about there with the spleen and stomach, one of its main functions is what we would call the transformation and transportation of the foods and liquids that we consume and transporting them through the tissues in the body. If this becomes impaired because someone maybe is stressed or underslept, or they're eating too many processed foods, or they're eating just too much food in general, there are a number of reasons why this can happen. And also just constitutional weakness in that area of the body. Some people just don't have a lot of digestive fire to begin with. So throughout whatever the reason may be, if we do not have this proper transformation and transportation of these nutrients into the system, into the brain, then we are going to feel logy. We may have lymphatic stagnation. We may have mental fog, as you're saying here. And it just really is very important in those situations for those types of people, for whatever the reason it may be that their earth element is being impacted. These techniques that we're talking about are really important because you take so much of what needs to occur in the digestive tract and it's happening instead on the kitchen counter. And then you can consume it and it's bioavailable to you in a wholly different way.
So we see a massive trend of people taking 20 plus supplements a day. From your perspective, is this a shortcut that works? Or are we ignoring the foundational kitchen work?
I think we may be ignoring. I mean, I remember being a kid and, watching the Jetsons and there was this idea that, we're just going to get these pills and like little created things that are going to give us exactly what we need. And I think that was really implanted into us that, there's a pill for an ill. And it's a short.
I like that. I've never heard that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
There's a pill for an ill. I hope I can remember that one.
Yeah, and that's something I believe that there are times in our lives when having some supplementation can be a therapeutic push and support that we need. As I would say to my kids when they were little and they would, go to school with the foods that I'd prepared for them at home. And, eventually they started coming back to me saying, I don't want to eat that because that doesn't look like everyone else's food. What I would say to them and what I would say to our listeners here is the world is crazy in terms of how you are faced with what your common nutrient choices are and the bombardments of other things happening in life. So there are these things happening over here that we are living within. So for us to come to a place of balance, we have to come over here and do real big things. So this is like what I was doing with my kids in the lunches I would send with them to school, raw cheese and homemade sourdough bread with a bunch of grass-fed butter and some apple slices. That didn't look like, you can imagine what was in the other kids' lunch boxes. And so I would tell them, listen, I'm having to do this over here because it's so crazy over here. I want you to be right here so things can be normal. When it comes to supplementation, I do believe that we can have sometimes where, some supplementation is a helpful, very important thing because we've been living so big over here. So, and doing it just with food, sometimes we need a supplement to that. Now, to think that you're going to get what you need from, as you say, 20 capsules of something a day and call it good, that is really missing the boat. There is so much, and I've already used the word once, but it's true. There is so much alchemy that occurs not just in the traditional food preparation techniques, but what happens inside of our bodies when we have a healthy gut microbiome. It's incredible what happens and what it does for the neurotransmitter production for our minds. It becomes this incredible synergy when we give this incredible foundation of nutrition to our body. And what I say to my patients, when we're talking about, looking at what their body is calling for nutrition is, yes, we can look at some supplements, but you have to eat. The eating is something you have to do. So let's just make it awesome. Let's make this as good as is feasible for you, because that's an important thing too. A lot of people, it would be hard for most people to just step directly into how I've brought myself into preparing food over the last 20 years. So when we look at that, we have to meet people where they are. And sometimes, again, a little supplementation can help as we bridge and help to bring people, to this healthy middle ground.
All right. So you've spoken about the behavior around breakfast. Mm-hmm. What is the most common mistake you see people making with their first meal of the day, and how does it set them up for failure by 3 p.m., let's just say?
Well, I have a couple of things I want to say about that. But I would say the most common is people starting their day with a coffee drink and having that be how the day begins for them. And again, this gets into a person's constitution. There are some people who do really well with coffee. There are others who don't, and they really shouldn't be drinking it. So we have to look at constitution of the person. But when you start your day, when you should have a natural cortisol spike, which is what gets you going in the day, and then you add to that a big caffeine spike, and usually with some sugar or some artificial sweeteners, you're going to get a lot of instability that occurs relative to the blood sugar. And then that can cause that afternoon crash. And this really does end up impacting how your sleep is the next night. And so if a person is going to have coffee in the morning, my suggestion is that it needs to be with a robust breakfast. And a robust breakfast could be something as simple as even, a boiled egg and half an apple. If a person says, I don't want to eat a lot, or some grass-fed whole fat yogurt with a little spoonful of honey and, maybe a piece of sourdough toast with grass-fed butter. This is very stabilizing to the blood sugar, and it's going to help to take that blast of caffeine and stabilize that so that the caffeine doesn't hit as hard and the blood sugar doesn't spike as high and they don't trough as low. So it's this stabilization at the beginning of the day. And I guess that's what I would say about that. I think that's like a huge impact that people just bring on themselves every day. And it's tough because it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because then, you're wiped out because you didn't rest well the night prior. So you're like, whoa, I need to just go get my face into a cup of coffee right now before I can even face the world. At some point, we have to get in front of ourselves and just say, I'm gonna just break this cycle. And I'm not saying to flat out quit coffee, but I am saying if you're going to do it and you see this pattern in yourself, be honest with yourself, then you need to bring some stability at the beginning of the day with better nutrition with that cup of coffee.
Okay. All right, so let's shift the topic a little bit here. I know you're relatively new to the work that I've been doing for 50 years with Biological Immunity Research Institute.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, we're centered on the idea that we can actually measure and move the needle on biological age through precise data-backed interventions. In your funky kitchen world, how do you see this high-level biometric data like what the BIA tracks? How do you see
Mm-hmm.
this validating or not the ancient traditional food practices that you teach?
Right. What I see, I think that there's a great merge here because a person in these different techniques around food preparation, it may be more appropriate for someone to focus more on fermented dairy and fermented grains. And another person, depending on, what their pH is, it may be more appropriate for them to focus more on creating bone broths and having stews and these sorts of things. So for some people, a lighter diet for helping to shift the pH, and for some people, a heavier diet to help to shift the pH. And that's one of the great things about this is there's nothing but optimal variety when we're looking at whole foods. I mean, there is the sky is the limit. And since beginning the work with the BIA, that's absolutely what I have done is begun shifting I'm shifting my diet. And we're also moving into summer. And so shifting the diet feels right anyway. And so that's what I'm doing. And I'm beginning to see shifts in my BIA profile numbers. And that's just for me, right? Because just as you say, I'm new to this and I'm just not in the place yet to, really bring this into my patients. I've got to kind of work my way with this, but it's such a tremendous tool to check in, see where you are. I have one of the client lab kits, and then also to reference that to how you feel, because that's your empirical finding. It's like, oh, the sugars are a little low or the sugars are a little high. How do I feel right now? And boy, that's wonderful because then you begin to get a gauge also checking in with yourself so that you can feel it in yourself, the impact. And so you don't maybe need to go check in on yourself quite as frequently.
Yeah, a lot of people just, I mean, they've never even thought about the fact, never even heard the concept of that maybe the key to monitoring what is going on with them is in their urine and their saliva. Most people are familiar with, oh, I gotta go get some blood work. I gotta go get my blood test and whatever. Well, that's fine. But the problem with blood is the body robbed Peters to pay Paul for forever, practically, before it would let anything go wrong with the blood.
Right,
So that's why so many people, you've been there, I've been there. You feel like crap. You go see the doctor. He does the blood work. He comes back and he says, "Well, your blood is just picture perfect."
right,
Well, if my blood is perfect picture, then why do I feel like crap?
right.
And well, yet they have no answer.
That's
They
right.
have no answer for that because they're not trained in what we're trained to do, which is in the pre-diagnostic world. The
Mhm.
pre-diagnostic world, if you can get inside that world with tests like testing your urine, your saliva, your hair,
Yep.
and things that show you trends and tendencies,
Yes.
it makes all the difference in the world. So anyway, we're moving away from one size fits all diets toward blood work based nutrition. I mean, there's just all these doctors are coming, these doctors do their thing for 20 years. I mean, back in the 70s and 80s, if a doctor left the traditional medical protocol or whatever you call it and stepped outside, I mean, they were ostracized. I mean, they were like, I mean, first of all, it rarely happened. And then pretty soon after 20 or 30 years, they wake up one day and you say, I'm not really, I'm not really helping anybody. All I'm doing is managing. I'm managing disease. I'm not helping them understand why they got sick. I'm not even asking the question of myself. But the trouble is, where do I go for that answer? I'm not trained. There's nothing in my training. It's all about managing disease. Now, oh my gosh. I mean, every time I turn around, there's another medical doctor who's now they've become a functional medicine doctor. And they're in our world now, finally, after
Yeah.
40 years, they're finally in our world asking the question, why did we get sick, whatever. But they're still stuck on blood
Yeah. Yeah.
because that's
And
their
you're right.
training.
Yep. And just as you say, the body will rob Peter to pay Paul. I mean, we need that buffering. We need that. And so the bones can be robbed, right? To
Right.
keep that buffering within the blood. And so, and you're exactly right. That's the body maintaining that homeostasis. There are so many pulls and pushes that can happen so that we stay upright. And so, yes, just as you say, if you can begin to see patterns early, long before, and maybe honestly, if a person's pretty good at maintaining that degree of homeostasis just for proper blood buffering, boy, there could be a lot of things that maybe won't be shown. And so the ability to work with the BIA and see that is so powerful. And as an aside, what I'm really enjoying doing is taking that information and then doing scans, doing the bioenergetic scan that at that moment and saying, okay, what am I seeing corroborating here between these two things? And I'm finding that they're fleshing one another out so beautifully. So for the ability to really help someone with where they are in a day and give them suggestions of kind of what they need to steer clear of and what they maybe need more of, that is really helping somebody.
So if of course, our favorite client is someone who has the lab kit to be able to do their own testing
Right.
because it means they can test if they want to. They can test every day, if they needed to, if they're really in a bad way,
Mhm.
or whatever. But it gives them, they don't have to come in, they don't have to send specimens by mail. Of course, the by mail thing works fine if they're out of state, or it enables us to work so-called remotely with
Sure.
somebody. But I don't know. You probably don't have any clients yet that actually have their own kit, right?
No,
You
I am
haven't.
planting seeds.
Okay. All
Mhm.
right. So when you're using the BIA platform to track someone's rejuvenation journey,
Mhm.
at what point do you think they usually realize that absorption, which you could call, I guess, the funky kitchen piece, is the bottleneck
Yeah,
in their data?
it's huge. At what point do they recognize that? I would say if they're working with me quickly.
Yeah,
Because
good.
and I'm a walking testament to that. When I first really began this kind of more functional medicine approach to things back in probably 2010 or so, I, of course, were our first patient, and I was eating so well by the textbook, and it wasn't landing. It wasn't getting into me, and that's when I really started working with some very pointed nutritional support to begin to shift that. So, of course, I think it's very important that we have our own history with these things. If we can share that with people, it makes it a bridge of an honest discussion because we have our own experience with it. And so I make a point of that in anything that I'm looking at with someone. And I just keep in mind that, as we age, our enzymatic capacity begins to decrease, and the enzymes they're the change makers in our body. And so I think a lot about enzymatic activity for people and what they may need digestively or throughout the whole system so that their body is, making more bioavailable to them, whatever is coming in.
So when you saw your first BIA,
Mm-hmm.
and we talked about what the numbers were saying and how it showed that you really are a wellness conscious person. You have numbers that some people strive for 6 or 8 months working the program to get those numbers. You already had those numbers, but there was something revealing in the
Yes.
BIA. What was the one thing that bounced off that you hadn't picked up on previously? That the
Right.
BIA was a key to help you in your own growth.
This reminds me of the different times in my life where I thought I was doing the right thing with nutrition. And I am told by someone who's looked, assessed me in one way or another and has said, you need to make a change this way. And you hear it and you think, well, I can't do that because I don't live that way. That's not how I do. The part of my BIA that really surprised me was how my sugars were actually a little bit too low. And I am a person who absolutely, I don't eat processed food. And, the sugars that I consume, it's not that I'm an anti-sugar person. It's just I keep them very nominal. I'm very good about meal spacing. So I was surprised to see my sugars were actually below range. And then the thing that really surprised me about that, and it took me a minute, but then I got it, how we need energy to make energy. And I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but I realized that I need a little bit more natural sugar in my diet to actually do so much more than I'm able to do right now. And so that to me was very surprising. And what I've noticed is that it's a very beneficial thing for me. I'm noticing when I check my sugars later in the day now, relative to my redox, which is, the inflammatory profile, chronic inflammatory presentation, because that was the other thing that was surprising to me was even with my sugars being so low, because in functional medicine, what is one of the cardinal things people say, well, you need low blood glucose so that you don't have inflammation. That's like the first thing really that I always looked at. And so to still have inflammatory action showing in the redox, the ORP, while having that low of sugar, it was like, what's going on here? So what I'm noticing now is as I brought in more sugar, later in the days, my redox is low. Like one time it was below 0. I couldn't believe it. I thought, did I mess something up here? Because the first time I tested my redox, it was 107. And so this is all shifting within a month. I mean, that's amazing. And so then I think, holy cow, what is that doing for me internally? That I am able to then dial this down so that I have so much energy more for other things, not dealing with this inflammation, monkey on my back. So, like, where in functional medicine would we have talked that way? That,
Exactly. There you go.
here's this woman, woman in her mid 50s who, she's got inflammation. She needs to continue to reduce her sugars. Well, no, actually, she needs a little more because she needs the energy to do the thing. It's amazing.
Well, that's what I love about the BIA. It's just a tool like no other. So, all right. So where can our audience go to learn more about you and how to get in touch with you?
Sure. You can just go to my website. It's naturallylivingtoday.com. And I believe there's a contact me on there, or you can just contact me at sarika@naturallylivingtoday.com. And I'm pretty good about checking my emails, so that's a good way to go. Sarica, Sarica.
All right. So if you could leave our audience with one takeaway about taking control of their health, what would it be?
It would be the importance of putting your health first. Because I think that we have been told that we need to always be doing for others, but it is so true. We can't do for others when we are tapped out and we don't have what we need to be able to do for others. And so to really look at the things that you have to do every day to keep yourself going. You have to drink water, you have to eat well, and movement, get out in the sun, and make sure you make sleep a priority in that whole microcosm. And then finally, wonderful relationships in your lives. These things are just so paramount.
All right. Well, thank you, Sarica. It was a pleasure. You are definitely a shining light and up there in the, well, I guess, I don't know. Is it called middle? Is it middle
It's
Arizona?
very middle. We are the middle
Yeah.
of Arizona right
Yeah,
here.
yeah. But you're in that gorgeous valley, so that
That's
helps a
gorgeous.
lot. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you on the next podcast, Common Sense Wellness, where you will find answers that you will not find anywhere else. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Common Sense Wellness with Dr. Gary Martin. To learn more about the testing and resources we discussed, or to find out how you can take charge of your own health, visit BIRI.org. You'll find valuable information, free tools, and ways to connect directly with our wellness community. That's BIRI.org. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and share the show with someone who's ready to take their next step toward better health.